Hello and welcome to Book of Leaves podcast. My name is Cara Carney and I am the host of the show. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 27, I think. It's very lovely to have you here. If you are a new listener, thank you so much. You are very welcome to this podcast. I started this about a year ago and I wanted to basically find people and businesses and campaigns that are doing something good for the planet in any way, chat to them, get to know them, learn from them, and we, the listeners, take a leaf from their book and add it to our own way of eco-friendly living, which is where the name comes from. So that's what it's all about. And for any regular listeners, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming back. And this episode, as you can see, is with Mary Reynolds. So if anyone doesn't know who Mary is, she hails from Wexford. That's where I grew up as well. We've got that in common. Basically, she's a garden designer and she, I think, is the youngest person ever to have won the Chelsea Flower Garden Show, or Chelsea Garden Flower, that, you know, the big flower garden show in Chelsea. Well, she won that in 2002 and basically since then was working as a garden designer, but has kind of taken her work more out of controlling gardens to look a certain way and be pretty and neat to letting them rewild, which is more beneficial to the environment and to nature and its inhabitants, and that includes us. So about a year or so ago, she started this campaign called We Are the Ark, which is encouraging people to give back some of the land that they're on to nature, basically. And we'll talk about that in detail in this podcast, why it's important and how to do it, basically. So I hope that you find some inspiration from this. There is a Facebook group called We Are the Ark, which is another really supportive community. I know social media can be a bit of a head melt for a lot of people and I totally understand that, but if you are someone who is on Facebook, I find it's all about following the right things, following the right pages and the right people for you. So I'm in a lot of, say, vegan groups and zero waste groups and groups like We Are the Ark, and there's a lot of hope and suggestions and positivity. So I really do enjoy finding groups like that and finding like-minded people that wouldn't necessarily be in my friend circle all the time. And if I've got questions about my garden or growing food or something vegan related, there's a community of people that are willing to help. So while social media can be tricky, this is one of those really lovely supportive groups that, as we'll talk about, is just full of hope. So I will link that in the show notes. And everything else, as usual, that Mary mentions will also be linked in the show notes, including the We Are the Ark website. But before I introduce you to Mary, I just want to ask, if you can support this podcast, I would really appreciate if you could share it around. If you could share it with a friend, recommend it by word of mouth is always the best way. And that's how I listen to most of the podcasts that I listen to, is someone recommending them to me, or share them on Facebook or Instagram. I'm on Instagram as well, Book of Leaves Podcast. I'm on Twitter too. So that would be a huge help. And if you can financially support this podcast, I do have a Patreon account, patreon.com/Book of Leaves, which is a way that if you have the spare money from life that you're not spending on coffee now or whatever, I would really appreciate €1 or €2 a month. And if you can't commit to a monthly contribution, I have a site on buymeacoffee.com where you can donate 1 or 2 coffees once off, and that is buymeacoffee.com/Book of Leaves. So if you could do any of that, it would really help go towards the website and podcast hosting fees, and that would be amazing. Thank you so much to everyone who's already donated. I really appreciate it. Now, without further ado, here is Mary Reynolds, and don't forget to stick around afterwards for some really quick notes. Enjoy! Morning, Mary. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me this morning. You're very welcome on Book of Leaves.
No problem. It's lovely to be here. Fair play to you for getting up early.
Oh, no problem at all. It makes me feel a bit more productive about the day. It's great. Come here, we'll jump straight in. You are the person who came up with the really great campaign that's We Are the Ark. So can you tell us what inspired you originally to start this?
Well, originally I was a garden designer. I worked all over the world in gardens, and kind of slowly I've been kind of talking myself out of that by observation that the land doesn't want to stay like I had told it to, So I originally, I think back about 4 or 5 years ago, I published a book. Maybe 4 years ago, published a book, and that was almost to the point of We Are the Ark, but it was about growing your own food in a way that would allow the land to become what it wants to become. But I've always been trying to figure out how to make a living and still do this and still protect the land. But I finally come to the conclusion that you can't. So one morning I was looking out over my garden and I saw a fox running past. And this was not last winter, the winter before. And just following the fox, there was 2 hares chasing him across the garden, which was quite unusual. And then I looked out and there was what I remember to be a family of hedgehogs, but I think it was probably just one along the edge of a hedge. And they're supposed to be asleep and they're nocturnal. And so I thought, right, there's something going on. So I went outside and I went in the direction they were coming from and I could hear machinery. And I live on a country lane, and at the end of the lane, across the road, there had been this incredibly beautiful thicket of a field, which was full of thistles and brambles and hawthorn and blackthorn and gorse, and it was completely impenetrable. And somebody had got planning permission at the top of the field, and they'd gone in with a digger and they'd done what everybody does, and they'd completely cleared out the field to make a garden without any thought for any of the creatures that we're sharing this world with. And I had done the same thing myself so many times, and that was the end of my efforts to be a designer of any kind, really. So I went home and decided that all these wild creatures that we're not taking care of, they've nowhere left to go. They can't go out into agricultural fields because they're poisoned, and the habitats are being stripped bare to maximize the inches that farmers can make profits upon. That's what they're supported to do. They're not supported to protect nature. That doesn't even come into it now. That there is new CAP proposals coming along which seem to be different, but we'll see. But with We Are the Ark, I went inside and started writing another book. And then I decided, God, that's just going to take too long. So I rang my friends Claire and Joe, and they have a forest garden with me up in Kilmuck in North Wexford, and told them what I was doing. And they got Ruth Evans, who did the illustrations for my book, on board, and Jen Halter-Prender, who does all their web stuff. And between the 4 of us, or the 5 of us, we put everything up onto a website to make it free and to make it happen as quickly as possible. And we made a decision not to sell anything. Didn't want it to be commercialized, didn't want it to become like anything other than a movement that belonged to everybody. So that's why we call it We Are the Ark. And I had the image of an ark because that's from a story from when I was a kid, the idea of all these creatures being saved on this tiny little spot. But it's not supposed to be religious in any way. So just, we called it acts of restorative kindness to the earth, just so that, and nobody thought it was some mad religious organization. It's just an image, and it works because people immediately get it. And we ask people to put signs up in their gardens saying this is an ark, and the website underneath, so that they don't have that shame that people feel when they leave something go messy and wild. Now they feel proud of it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, the importance of the signage, because that is kind of a big part of We Are the Ark, that you've got templates on your website that you can print a little template on, or you can make your own, just saying We Are the Ark and the website, and you stick it in your garden or wherever the weeds are so people can see it. Have you experienced that without the sign? How do people react? Like, it's funny that they kind of need to have something written in front of them for them to accept it or something.
Yeah, it's ingrained into our psyches that we have to control everything, and that nature was always kind of seen as a dangerous thing. And throughout history, if you look at the history of landscape design, like, boring subject and all, but it's all about pushing nature away and creating these little safe spaces from all the wild animals, but now we need to actually try and help them. So I'm asking people to become guardians instead of gardeners, to be of service to those creatures, the ones you can see and the ones you can't see. I mean, the amount of life that's being lost below the earth, One spray of herbicide will kill 50% of all earthworms in the soil where it's been sprayed, And so, yeah, the sign is very important because that kind of shame thing is really ingrained. Even if you're an activist and you really want to help, you still find it difficult to explain to your neighbors or not explain to your neighbors, or that your garden is a mess. But if you put this sign up and people go to such great lengths to make the most beautiful signs, then it changes your own perception of it and other people's perception of it. And the wonderful thing that happens is that life returns so quickly. They become filled with insects and native plants. We ask people to take out all non-invasive plants, to take out invasive plants, non-native invasive plants. Sorry, it's a bit and, and because they're of no benefit, they haven't evolved alongside the local food web, so they're of no benefit to the ecosystem. We have decided that we have the right to artistically design these blank canvases that we call our little patches of this earth, and that we are entitled to treat them as an artistic expression. And I'm actually standing up and saying that's enough of that now, guys. Gardens are over. You're either growing your own food and giving the rest of it back to nature, or you're just sorry, but it's not enough, it's not enough to keep doing that. So some people, they just cannot bring themselves to do that. So we're asking them if you'd even consider giving half of your garden back to nature, or a patch of it even, because what happens is when they give back a patch, they start to expand it because they see what comes to live there, and they realize how much good they're doing and how many families they're now sharing their home with. Even if they start with a small patch or a window box that they filled up with topsoil from the local area and allow the weed seed bank to emerge from that, and that will support creatures. It's all about being of service, really.
Yeah, and there really only needs to be a tiny patch for there to be so much life. The house I lived in before the one I'm in now, in the garden, there was one corner, maybe 2 meters by a meter, that we left completely wild, and there was dogs and the rest of it that were like running around. But one morning I could see there was loads of birds on these really tall wildflowers, and I recorded it. And then they all flew away, and in the video I paused it and was able to count, and there was 15 birds like just eating bugs from this tiny little patch, and it was just like, oh my god. So it's really, really important. And the sign as well, my sister has a little tiny patch of grass that isn't fenced from the neighbor, so she's letting hers grow wild, and she put up a little sign saying, don't mind the weeds, we're feeding the bees, or something like that. And the neighbor, they mowed their patch, and when they would have usually just seen the neighbors and went, oh, I'll do them a favor and mow theirs as well, they left it alone completely. So she still has all the weeds growing in front of her house. So that it really does make a difference. People kind of do stop and think, and hopefully maybe the neighbors will get a good idea as well. But you talked about being a guardian, which I like. I remember seeing you in a TED talk about being guardians of the earth. Would you be able to explain a little bit more around being a guardian as opposed to how we're kind of living at the moment?
Sure. Every single creature on the planet, it's like a web, the whole web of life, okay? And every single one of those creatures has an important role to play in that web of life. Like, we don't understand hardly any of the relationships and how they affect others. You won't have fish in the sea without trees. You won't. There's all these really cracked relationships that you go, wow. That the intelligence in the system is massive, and we really don't understand them. And the basis of that whole system is wild plants and soil and healthy soil. And the only creature that lives on this planet that doesn't have any role to play is humans. We've become a destructive force to that system. But we weren't always, and there's still a lot of people in the world who live in harmony with nature as guardians, the native people. But we've become so disconnected. And I believe, and this is just my thoughts on it, that we became disconnected from the earth when the kind of Christian religions came in. Because before that, in the pagan religions in Ireland, pagan is such a negative term, but there was an understanding that if we didn't take care of the land, that the land would become the wasteland. And the Christian religions came in and said, look, lads, you don't need to worry about this place because it's all about preparing for the next life in the fluffy clouds. It was like the earth is like a big heart that we took care of. And then when we disconnected from it and decided that we owned it rather than took care of it, it kind of shattered into all these tiny pieces. And some of us are lucky enough to have a tiny piece of heart to take care of. So there's a huge possibility and potential in all of us stepping up and doing what we can with each of those tiny pieces and giving nature a chance, because she has no chance if we wait for leaders to step up, politicians, because they're not going to, not fast enough. So we need to lead from below, and become the leaders that we've been waiting for, basically, which is a lovely term I hear Extinction Rebellion using.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing.
It's brilliant. People often are hesitant to return their patches of earth back to nature if they have dogs or children. But in your experience, are you able to have a patch of earth that's rewilding, that's safe for your kids to play in?
Well, it depends on the size of your space, So, I mean, I have kids, so I know that I wouldn't have been able to do this if I only had a small amount of land, because I would have to have somewhere to throw them outside, They have to run around, and that's just the way it is. So it depends on every individual situation is different, Cats and dogs don't really go very well with wild creatures. Cats are responsible for so many bird deaths. And so we just ask people just to be aware of this and to get them to wear those bells, the ones that they don't get caught in trees with, just to give the creatures a chance to get away. I mean, The cats don't need to hunt because you're feeding them. So, and the creatures need support. I understand, because I love animals of all kinds, and I have a dog, but I won't let her run wild in a wild place, because she'd just chase all the creatures out, or the ground nesting birds, or the leverets, or whatever it is that's going on. They don't need to hunt or chase these creatures. These creatures are really in desperate need of our support. And if we don't support wildlife and wild plants and wild creatures, then we're screwed, because the collapse in nature in Ireland is almost complete. Our nature has already collapsed in Ireland. People are amazed when they see a butterfly or a particular insect or a bird or a wild plant, and you're kind of going, oh my God, this is terrible. I get really upset by that, because people are so delighted when they see one thing. When the skies used to go black with butterflies, or it was just the most abundant, beautiful place, and now it's just a desert, a green desert. Now it's a food desert, and there's very little for us or wild creatures to survive on, and we have to change everything. It would be so simple if we could just move back to local sustainable living, and we could give so much land back to nature then, and take the sheep off the hills, allow them to rewild, pay the farmers to become guardians. Don't pay them to keep a few sheep that's not allowing anything else to survive. It's so obvious, all the stuff that needs doing. It's not difficult, but unfortunately the lobby groups are very strong and powerful.
I guess it has to start with the people, and then once enough people mobilize, then when we see change. But it's a good place to start, and it, like you said, it makes a difference very quickly as well. We can even see in the pandemic that we're in at the moment how humans just stop traveling and flying for a while, and how the sky's clear. So if we just give more back, that would be amazing. So I guess for a guideline for people, if they want to give a part of their garden back to nature and it's all grassy, do they need to plant wildflowers, or how do they basically get started on creating an ark?
So lawns generally, unless they're kind of, patches of fields that were just mowed into a lawn, if they're sown lawns, they're way too competitive with the native plants. So if you allow an ordinary lawn to grow tall, it'll just kind of fall over on itself and become like a thatch, and it just nothing really grows through it. There's 5,000 weed seeds in every square foot of soil if it's a healthy soil, and they're what we need to reboot an ecosystem. And they only need 1/30th of a second's worth of light to activate. So all you need to do is you do need to. Some people can't do this, but if you can, if you could just scrape off the grass somehow with a spade or with, just scrape off the very top, because I don't want to lose any topsoil, and make a pile of that grass on top of itself, so that'll break down, somewhere in the garden. It's a great place for ground nesting bees and things if you kind of, create a little bank and maybe cover it with some twigs and things. Yeah, you can use everything to nature's advantage, basically. But anyway, back to the lawn. So you scrape off that, and then you just rake it a little bit, and the light will activate the weed seeds. Okay. Now you might find if you live in an urban situation, soil can be very damaged. You might need to sow a meadow. Now the ideal thing is to go and get what we call an ark meadow. So you go around your locality and you collect weed seeds, like all the things that people are just dying to get rid of. We want them. So you collect them and you make your own meadow and you plant them into that soil. If you can find local kind of old woods or hedgerows, if you can take cuttings of native shrubs and trees, that'll be of huge help. And then you kind of step back and watch them come up. And you have to think in tree time. You just have to wait and watch and see if anything happens. And if nothing is happening, then you bring in the ark meadow. And if you can't get an ark meadow, then you find your local organic wildflower meadow person, and that's the next best thing again. Well, I would ask people to take out non-native plants if they can. Like rhododendron kills the bees, when they collect the pollen from rhododendron, it kills them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Not all of them, but poisons most of them anyway. And people don't know that, and they think, oh, but it's so pretty, I can't possibly do that. Or they talk about, and it's true, that who do I think I am for saying what plants should and shouldn't be here, And I understand that every plant is a living thing, but the reality is we are on this planet to take care of it, and that's the only reason. And maybe it's not a reason, but it's the only way we're going to get to stay here. So if you take out those plants, yeah, it's not an easy choice sometimes, but just be aware that everything you eat causes pain to something, and we're trying to support this little patch of earth to become as supportive to wildlife as possible. You have to be a tough parent sometimes and take things out.
You referenced before in a talk, it's almost like raising children. Like you don't let them just run wild. Like you do have to guide them a little bit.
Because bare earth is like a vulnerable child. It's looking to us because it doesn't have a choice. We have not given sovereignty back to the land. We need to set it free. That's what all the myths were about. We're about giving sovereignty back to the earth, or else we won't be able to live here. All those women in myths and everything, it was all about sovereignty. And there was this practice in Ireland up until the 15th century called the Banishri. The king or the chieftain or the leader had to perform these rituals called the Banishri, where they married the land every year. That was the masculine and the feminine kind of, that was the kind of the understanding that there had to be a balance. And if he wasn't or she wasn't taking care of the land, then it would become the wasteland. And we only get to live here in abundance and in harmony if we take care of all the other creatures and we don't get greedy and take too much. Yeah, so land when it's bare is like a vulnerable child, and it's up to us to guide it back to kind of a full maturity as much as we can, because we're missing all the creatures that would naturally help balance that, like wolves, because you have to have all these creatures in place for a balanced ecosystem to be there, but we have islandized everything, we've broken it all up. There's very little hope for wildlife in our world. There's almost no hope really. So we have to bring that hope back. It's like a weird concept that we have to treat the land like you treat a child, but that's the only way I can handle it,
Yeah.
Otherwise I just feel like I'm just being controlling or.
Yeah, like you said, we're being guardians and kind of guiding it instead of trying to make it look like a neat shaved, pristine lawn, which are so last year, guys. Get with the program. Hopefully, we'll get some people to give their bit of their garden back. I also wanted to ask, you mentioned your first book was actually about growing food. So for people that are trying to start growing their own vegetables, it is possible, I believe, to wild your garden and grow food as well. How would you advise people on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's the number one important thing to do, is to grow your own food as much as you can and support local regenerative organic farmers as much as you can. Most of the reason these wild creatures have nowhere left to go is agriculture. Industrial agriculture, fishing and forestry is an absolute, it's killing everything on the planet. Like, so if we can step out of that system as much as possible, it's really important. So like, everybody has different ways of doing it. You can do it within the concept of a forest garden, but it takes a long time to develop abundance within that. But if you've got a good bit of land, a forest garden is a permaculture concept where you have layers of food from parent trees, lower canopy trees, shrubs, perennials, ground cover, root layer, and climbers. You can grow a lot of food in a small area because it's all on different levels. But you need to space them out a lot further in Ireland because there's not much light here. Even though on a day like today, it's hard to believe, but it's the light here is not as strong as say in the tropics where food forests would be quite common. You can do that, or I rent the house I'm in at the moment. I have 5 acres that I'm working with and turning into an ark and growing and a food forest and all that sort of thing. But I don't live there yet because I'm a disaster. I'll eventually get there. And anyway, but in my rented place, the landlord gave me this tiny little patch to grow food, and I've been expanding it every year, and he hasn't seemed to notice. But so what I do, I do no dig, just because it's very simple and very fast here. And so you put down cardboard on top of the lawn, layers of cardboard, you soak it, and then you put peat-free compost on top of that, about 6 inches, and you just plant straight into it. And then I cover that with some mulch, and then everything does really well, and there's no digging involved. And then I might have a strip of that, and then a strip of ark, and then a strip of food, and then a strip of ark. So that's a really good way of doing it, because then you don't have much pest problems. Pest is the wrong word, but
you don't have caterpillars or slugs, because they're focused more on the ark. They've got juicy flowers instead. Yeah.
Well, there's that, and also the natural predators for them have habitat as well, so there's a bit more of a balance. Yeah, it's important just even to create an arc around the edges of your garden, and if you have one, and to knock holes in the walls to allow hedgehogs or other creatures to move through.
Oh yeah, that's something that came up on a podcast before, I think with Collianis. We were talking about like making your garden more critter friendly, and yeah, if you've got because the brick walled gardens are just completely locking everything in and everything out. So if your neighbors are okay with it, talk to them, isn't it, and then try chip out just a ground level hole in the wall. It doesn't have to be big.
No, I mean, a CD sized hole kind of thing, will be enough for most creatures. Just a little bit bigger, I would, because I'd like to see foxes and things if I were living in town. But it's a lot more exciting than seeing a dead space, but yeah, just make sure you're structurally not going to collapse on you or whatever. Just get some advice, and ideally remove the walls altogether and plant a living boundary like a hedge, which will completely support wildlife with native plants. A native hedge, mix of wild roses, hawthorn, blackthorn, hazel, all those things. It's always a lovely. Or else plant the hedge, and then when the hedge is established, remove the wall, or just work towards it a little bit by little, and makes a big difference. And water, if you can. I mean, if you think about it, what are we missing in the system? So, I mean, there's a debate on whether wild boar were here or not, all the time. But I like to think they were here. They would be important in the system. I'm not an ecologist. I'm only learning myself all the time, and I'm studying ecosystem restoration and trying to catch up, because I all this is new to me as much as anyone else, but I'm very passionate about it. I'm very sure it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm very sure the gardens need to be finished, and that this is a new time in history for stop treating the planet like it's something for us. It's not, you know. But pond is a good idea, because wild boars would naturally kind of, they'd scuff up the soil, or you know, and they create little ephemeral ponds. They're really important for wildlife. And they'd also expose the annual weed seeds. So I always ask people to scuff up a little area every year and expose more weed seeds, because those weeds don't get the chance to come out otherwise. You know, or else if it becomes all brambles, there's no deer to eat back the new shoots. So it's nothing but brambles. You need to kind of find a balance, you know. But it's easy to make a pond. In my little patch out there, I just have a big basin that I've sunk into each of the arks, you know, and then I fill that with rocks, so that if anything goes in, they can get out again, and then fill it with rainwater, you know. But in my 5 acres, my land, I'm digging out ponds and stuff, because there's ghost ponds. There used to be ponds there until farmers filled them in, you know.
Oh, that was actually something I was going to ask. If you know the patch of earth that you're a guardian of used to be either a forest or used to have a pond there, should you kind of be restoring it to what you know people had seen before, or how you had seen it documented, or should you just let it become whatever it wants in a new way?
All land wants to become woodland, unless it's you know, the top of a mountain or a floodplain or something, you know. So I would be understanding, you know, that that's where it's going, you know. It really depends on your situation. I mean, I don't have very small children, so having a pond is not an issue, you know. So if you're going to do that, and you have kids or whatever, you wouldn't necessarily want to do it until they're a little older, or maybe you would, depends on the person. I mean, I wouldn't have minded, you know, the kids, I'd been on top of them anyway, but it's not always that simple. So anyway, without all the missing creatures, land would eventually become a dense canopy of woodland, you know, because it doesn't have kind of the big mammals to knock down, you know, young trees, or the grazers, or so we have to become all those creatures. So we can't really allow it, sorry for the whole control words, but to become a dense canopy, because there's very little life in a woodland with darkness underneath, you know. You kind of have to be the light holders, you know, to be all those creatures that are missing, and to understand that you have to have, you know, patches within it that are coppiced, that you cut down the wood and you create light spaces so that it doesn't become this heavy canopy. Now, it's a long way ahead, and in a small garden, you know, it's not even an option, you know.
Yeah.
But if you have a good piece of land, yeah, there's work involved, because we've taken out all the wolves and everything. We have to do this work. Sure, you know, you could be gardening, and that's a lot more hard work and a lot more boring, you know. So with this, you're doing something really valuable, and it's really valuable for our souls, because you just feel really empowered, because you see how quickly nature can recover if you just step in and help. And then you walk out and you see all these patches of bare green in everybody else's lawns, or in the county council, or in local government organizations, and you go, why? Like, why? That's all wrong. And people put up signs saying this could be an ark, you know, just to strike up conversations, you know. Yeah, so it just changes everything, because it empowers people. And when you empower people, they suddenly become warriors for nature, you know. And this is the really positive thing. It's because even in the Facebook group, we've a really strong policy. I've a load of admins that are just wonderful, that work with me on it, you know, because I can't be doing it all the time, you know. The lads are brilliant, and I've never met them, but we just have great crack, you know, and they're really lovely people. And one of our strongest rules is kindness, you know. This is acts of restorative kindness. And negativity, we won't allow any negativity into that Facebook group. We really want it to be a place of hope, which you can't find anywhere else. Now, if you go to my Facebook page, I'll scare the bejesus out of you.
Yeah, you're always sharing really good articles. Yeah, I'll be linking the Facebook group for people to join in the show notes. It's a really lovely supportive group, and there's always really good ideas in there. And then arcs from it's not just Ireland, like there's people from all over the world doing their bit with the land that they have, which is amazing. But you mentioned something there about government land and councils, and something which is the last thing I kind of want to ask you about is you also work on local public land. So how do you approach your local council if you know that there's a patch of land somewhere that all they're doing with is just coming out and mowing, and that's it? How do you approach them? Who in the council do you contact, and are there any kind of resources you need to send them for them to believe what you're doing isn't like crazy or whatever?
Well, we have a section for local councils on the website, so you could send them that. Or you contact whoever you know. You know, in Ireland, it's always the same. Who do you know? You know, or who do you know who knows somebody in there? And just get to talk to someone, or even write a letter, because they have to respond. You know, and the more people who suggest it, councils are very easily led. The people who contact the councils most are people who are giving out about places being untidy, you know. So we need to be louder than them, basically, and say we want it to be untidy, you know, we want it to be full of life. And it's a win-win for them, because they're leaving it go wild and putting up signs, and that's all, you know. The local men's sheds make the signs, so what's the problem? You know, it's a win-win. They have all this extra manpower that they can do other stuff with. Everything is unique, every situation is unique. Just do what you can, you know.
Yeah. And if there's any teachers or anyone who works in schools listening, like if they can do that with the patch of the school land, I mean, that would be really good for education, because a lot of people, like you said, haven't seen wildlife. I can't remember the last time I've seen a hairy molly caterpillar. Like, I know I'm also living in Dublin, but
No, I haven't seen one in years.
yeah,
You know.
and I see them all the time growing up as a kid. So, and kids get amazed when you see ladybirds, for example. So if there's a patch of wild land in a schoolyard, it can absolutely be used in their education and on break times. Oh my God, I would have been having so much fun. But we were all like sitting against a wall being the cool kids instead. So there's absolutely like so many pros.
The other thing is lighting. We have the major problem of chemicals in agriculture and in gardening. That has to stop, and it will stop, because it's killing everything. But another major problem that people don't even realize is lighting is a major problem. So when we moved from kind of amber lights into the blue and white toned LED lights, which are in all the street lights and most people's outdoor bulbs, they blind wildlife. They blind the night pollinators. So we have wiped them out almost, you know. If you've no food for bats, you know, there's a whole knock-on effect without those pollinators, like those moths that they create a lot of the grubs or the caterpillars or whatever that feed the baby birds in the nests, you know. Like that's baby food for birds. It's just we don't have them anymore because they can't see, so they can't pollinate, so they can't reproduce. So they can't feed themselves. That's a disaster. So if you do have any outdoor lighting, or say it to your council, you know, that has to change at policy level, because councils seem to find it very hard to do things on their own. It's just kind of sad. It'd be really nice if they took more power and just said, no, we're going to change all the light bulbs back to amber tones. You know, but we'll get there. It's just little bit by little bit. So we'll start with our patch of the earth, and then just do what you can outside of that.
And if you have one of those back garden lights, get one of those automatic switch off ones, or just make sure only to turn it on when you're using it, when you need it or whatever, and then to turn it off. But I presume you can buy amber lights in hardware shops, which are open now.
Yeah.
So people should be able to find those. Amazing. We've covered loads there. Unless there's anything else in related to the Ark, I mean, there's just so much information on the website. So if anyone has any further questions, I would always direct them there, and then to join the Facebook group for kind of ongoing support and ideas. Unless there's anything else you want to add, have you any other advice for people, I guess, in general, when it comes to eco-friendly living, or in this weird time with the pandemic that we're in now, that you'd like to share with anyone?
I think maybe we do need to learn a few more ancestral skills, like growing food, how to heal with herbs and plants and wild plants. I think to empower yourself to be independent outside of the system will make you feel better, you know. Try and dream up a good vision of the earth ahead of us, because most people are just holding this vision of collapse and darkness. And actually, Rob Hopkins wrote a beautiful book called What Is to What If, or something like that. Sure. But it's a beautiful vision of the future. And I think more of that needs to happen, because when you look back, well, you're very young, but when I look back, they would have had all these mad visions of things like from Star Trek or whatever, and they all came true. And I'm convinced that it's because somebody imagined it and then the energy created it. So that sounds a bit wacky, but I think unless we create a beautiful vision for our future, it'll be very hard for us to move towards it. So I think it's important for people to focus on the beautiful future that is possible. That would help. And then just keep working towards it. But to always hold the image that everything is going to be okay. Because it's hard to believe that these days, because we're surrounded by so much disempowerment. Yeah.
Such a lovely message to end on, Mary. Thank you so much for chatting to me this morning. I really appreciate it. Now, there we go. I hope you guys were able to take away something from that, and we ended on a very hopeful note. So it's really important to envision the future that we all want to have, because it is possible. A few things. We mentioned a couple of books in there. They're linked below. If whatever podcast platform you're listening on doesn't have links, if it just says text and you can't actually click into anything, that's just a way that they've copied it. But if you go onto the website bookofugliespodcast.com, everything is linked there, and the most recent episode is always on the homepage as well, so it's easy to find. Don't forget to join their Facebook group, that's linked as well, and the website has so much information. I'm just going to read out like a quick snippet of what they have on wearetheark.org. So they've got loads of resources if you want to build an ark, from lists of invasive species depending on what country you're in. They've got lists of invasive species for Australia, America, etc, etc. They've got lists of native species. They've got documents up there and articles to read, all related to rewilding and basically building the future that we want to have. And there's a 12-step guide to building your own ark, which has everything, and there's a guide to contacting your local council, or if you're a school, how to build an ark at your school. And there's also templates that you can download. There's just a lot of resource material. We barely touched the tip of the iceberg in the iceberg in this episode. So if you want to know more, check out wearetheark.org. It answers a lot more questions, and of course the Facebook group as well for some live interaction and support is very helpful. Now, what I was going to say, if you did enjoy this podcast, there's 3 other podcasts that kind of link to what we talk about here. So check out episode 25 with Sinead from Extinction Rebellion and the Be a Hero campaign, where there's a lot of advice on how to grow your own food organically at home that doesn't really affect wildlife. So if you are interested in growing food, episode 25 is for you. Also, episode 15 with Collie Ennis, we talk a lot about doing certain things like creating little ponds, and Mary talked about making a bank of leaves and covering that with twigs to help solitary bee species and things like that. We delve really deep into that with Collie Ennis in episode 15. So if you're interested in that kind of biodiversity, check that out. And in episode 12, we interview an activist from Extinction Rebellion called Cormac Nugent, and we talk a lot about climate science and that. But the reason that's also very heavily linked, aside from climate change, is the activism. So as Mary said, and we talked about, what we're doing really makes a difference. Your small patch of earth will attract so much life, and it really is amazing to see and so simple to do. But on the grand scheme of things, we need systematic corporate change, and the only way we can do that, the only way we can get policy change, is activism from people, grassroots movements where the population tells the government what they want. And in episode 12 we go into that, and we go into the 3.5% rule, which is basically a study that shows if 3.5% of the population mobilise, the government start to listen. For example, Irish Water. So many people came out that the government was forced to listen. And our government, and a lot of governments around the world, are typically corporate led, and that is not okay for us, and it's not okay for the planet, and we need to change that. So support the politicians that are against that kind of thing, that want to change, and join political parties if you want. I would really recommend joining Extinction Rebellion and getting involved with them. You don't have to risk your job or risk anything by getting involved, but getting onto the street or joining these communities and campaigns and following the likes of Friends of the Earth and Not Here, Not Anywhere, and signing petitions, and really, really important, having conversations with your family and your friends that are close to you. A lot of, typical Irish families, we're very well known for being set in our ways and having the pristine lawn and having our meat and two veg, and we're not very big fans of change, even though we've gone through a lot of change. So really have these conversations with your friends. Sometimes you can feel, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, you're in an echo chamber. You've got the same kind of circle of people who already think like you. Not everyone in your family or your friend circle will think like you. So ignite these conversations. Have empathy. People will be very likely, if you start talking to them about their lawn. My dad, for example, he was out mowing the grass and I was like, did you have to? And straight away the defense walls go up, which is a natural thing. So the only way to get through that is to have dialogue. Don't shut each other out. We need to talk to each other about our use of pesticides, etc. But we really need to get on the streets, and I can't wait for these restrictions to lift so I can start campaigning with other like-minded people who are being the leaders that we need to have. So that's really important. Sorry for the sidetrack there, but activism and lobbying governments is so important, and you never know when you might be the last monkey on the tree, the last person to get it to that 3.5% mark. It is really important. So the more people that get involved with activism, and that takes many forms. It could be phoning your TD, sending emails, signing petitions, having those conversations. You are an activist then, and it makes a difference. I can see it in the small circle around me. People start to change, and if you lead by example, your friends and family will follow. Because we haven't got a lot of time to fix this. So it is really important that we do address it as soon as possible. And I find as well, I know in this time it can be really hard for a lot of people in this pandemic to give to other causes. And I totally understand that. If you can't, that's totally okay. I personally find that in dire situations like we're in at the moment, what gives me hope and what helps me is finding the people that are trying to make things better than they are at the moment, and it gives me that hope. So that's what the likes of Extinction Rebellion and these groups on Facebook do. These are people that even in the darkest times like we're in today, they're still trying to make things better. So look out for those people, find out what groups they're in, find your local cleanup group. There's cleanup groups that are going out and doing socially distanced cleanups, and don't forget, contact your councils, try get them to build an ark, and just find your tribe. Basically, this is a tribe, the Book of Leaves podcast, and I'm so appreciative of the small little community we have here. So get in touch if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, if you have any suggestions, or if you want to be on the podcast. There's no requirements. You don't need to have a business or have won gold in the Chelsea Flower Garden show. If you're doing something good for the planet, I want to hear from you. Let me know. And if you want to be in a podcast, this very well could be the podcast for you. So I hope you enjoy this. Please don't forget to share it with a friend. Share it with people that have land and are even sick of mowing it all the time. That takes a lot of work. I used to hate mowing the grass growing up. So this can be a way. It's less work for you, and you get to reap so many benefits by watching wildlife. It's amazing. I went to walk in a local park here 2 days ago, and the excitement we saw when we saw fish in the pond was just amazing. What was I saying? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share this episode. Please rate it if you're on Apple Podcasts, especially. It really helps other people find it. So give it a review. And that's it really. And if you can support it on Patreon or buymeacoffee.com, that would be so amazing. Thank you so much, guys. I will join you in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Book of Leaves. In the meantime, stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask if you can, and I'm sending you a lot of love, and don't forget your eco-friendly sun cream. And I will talk to you soon, guys. Bye.